We are ending with a bang here. We are ending with one of the most interesting companies, one of the most controversial companies of the last year. Let's bring on Nigel Eccles from FanDuel.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nigel.
I'll be back a bit.
Thank you for coming.
No, thank you for inviting me.
You're never quite sure when you invite someone who's in a lot of legal trouble if they're going to come on stage. So I'm very happy that you made it.
That.
Thanks for the time.
No problem.
I think a lot of people know what FanDuel is, so we're not going to go through the entire history of FanDuel, but I want to go through some of the backstory first, because this is a company that I was vaguely aware of over the last year.
Yeah.
Everyone became very aware of it this fall. You had no choice.
Yeah.
But I thought this was a company you'd created a couple years ago. It turns out there was a version, you started at something earlier, you pivoted.
Yeah.
So just explain quickly how you got to here.
Sure. So our first company we started in 2007, a product called HubDub, which was a prediction game, play money, did a lot of prediction markets around the 2008 elections. And it was cool, a lot of fun, really good engagement. But what we discovered was it didn't make any money, and that became a bit of a problem. So in 2009, we looked at it and said, we want to do something around predictions, but we wanted to have like a real business model around it, and so that's we happened on fantasy sports.
So that's a straight up pivot into fantasy sports.
Pivot into fantasy sports, yeah.
And was it always this sort of idea of daily fantasy?
Yeah. So what we looked at, and we actually talked to fantasy players. We weren't fantasy players ourselves, so that was a bit of a handicap, but it meant we talked to players and they said that kind of a couple of things they really hated. You didn't like the randomness of the draft, so when you play season long, your draft order, so you can get a great position, get number 1, or you can get 12. And they didn't like the impact of injuries on their season, so you could pick a player, top pick, guy's injured, like say a Des Bryant, and it kind of ruins your season. And they didn't like the fact that their friends dropped out during the season and ruined it. So
but just to begin, I think anyone in here gets this. Fantasy sports is this giant business in the U.S.
But 50 million people play it in North America.
Giant business for Yahoo, among others.
Yeah.
And they said, this is good, but we also want to tweak on it. And you
so what we thought was we could address those problems and also make it a much more mobile experience, much faster. And the innovation we thought was, let's take that season and collapse it down into one day, so that I'm always picking players they're going to play, and then I can play and win in one day.
So you started that in 2009, and that's more or less the game that we have today.
Pretty much, like a lot of product innovation every year to make it better, but that was the genesis.
So all of a sudden, last fall, you've got $1 gazillion in funding. You're worth $1 billion. You're spending a ton of money on advertising, which we'll get to in a second. But when did it ramp up where everyone was suddenly throwing money at you and investing in you? And by the way, SB Nation, Fox Media has a deal with you guys. There's another onstage disclosure. I've seen none of that money. When did that really ramp up?
It grew every year. Like the first couple of years were really hard. Like that's the one thing I'd say about our company was our first couple of years, nobody really believed in it. They felt it was niche. They thought that people would never come out of season long. They felt that it was too hard. There was like we would pitch VCs and say, "Hey, I'm a big sports fan, but this takes too long. I didn't win. I don't think this would go mass market." So really, from 2009 to 2011, we were really on a skeleton crew. And then 2011, the first time we started to raise a bit of money. And it really was ramping from 2011.
What was the fuel that was making it go?
In the early years?
Just when 2011 when I started picking it, was that you were spending
we started to get more investment, but the core was that our players always loved our product. From like 2009, when the product was kind of terrible, like that was the thing that I looked at fantasy as like, in 2009, the Yahoo and ESPN, CBS products were really schlocky. They really were not good products, and people were loving it. And I always think that if I take a category where the product's bad, but people are engaged and make the product good, then that should be a business case. And so we launched in 2009. Our product wasn't great, but people were really engaged. And so there was a combination of continuing to optimize the product, but also to continue to ramp up marketing and optimize the efficiency.
So in 2014 and 15, all of a sudden you're doing deals with leagues, with teams, with broadcasters,
across the
long list of people. As you're raising money and striking these commercial deals, are there people saying, "Hey, wait a minute, is this legal or not?"
Oh, like all throughout the process. From the very, to be honest, we came up with a concept in Austin, South by Southwest in 2009, and literally on the flight I was reading, there's something called the Unlawful Internet Gaming Enforcement Act, which is a federal law which defines fantasy sports at a federal level and says it's legal. So I was literally reading it going, okay, you know, we can do this. And I obviously went and got a professional lawyer to do that, and also to look at, you know, all 50 states. But from the very start, we always took a very conservative legal approach to say, we're not going to do this if there's any question about its legality.
So you guys said flat out it's legal, or did you say, well, we think it's legal and we're going to find out?
No, completely clear of its legality. Just to explain the legality of fantasy sports, because that's worth touching on. So fantasy sports was a product created by fans. It was actually created in the 1960s in New York. And has been played for...
By a journalist, no less.
I believe so, yes, in a rotisserie restaurant, thus creating the name rotisserie baseball, thus confusing generations of Americans of what it was. So, so he created the first league, you know, and that kind of spread out from there. And I always joke that the first technological innovation in fantasy sports was the fax machine, because before that, everybody did it by paper. So the reason it was considered legal from then onwards was it was considered a game of skill. And in US law, and different states have different law, but in general, there is, if something is skill predominant or is a contest between players where skill is a predominant factor, that's considered a bona fide game of skill, distinct from gambling. And that's why a golf tournament is legal, that's why a spelling bee is legal. So on a state level, that's the first piece. Then in the federal level was this law that I mentioned, which is the only law that touches on fantasy sports, which is UEG 2006, gives it a safe harbor. And then there's been a couple of examples of case law which sort of reinforce that state law that says, yes, this is a bona fide game of skill.
And this is the key thing for you, right? It's a game of skill, it's not gambling.
The skill predominance factor. The skill predominance test is the general test.
And that's the core of your legal argument.
Again, it varies by states, but in most states, that's the test, the skill predominance.
Right, and again, I think a lot of right-thinking people will go, I don't know, it kind of looks like gambling to me, but you can debate it, and that's where you are now.
Yeah.
But my question was, when you're out doing investment deals with Comcast, when you're out doing deals with the NHL, was anyone raising a flag and saying?
At every point, we would go through that process of, you know, how does this fit within, you know, the current framework, the current law, that every point we do due diligence on it. So
it wasn't like an Uber situation saying, look, we're going to end up in court, or we're going to end up fighting regulators, but you got to come along for the ride.
Well, what I would say, though, is from very early on, I think we became aware that we were a small, unregulated market. Small, unregulated markets are generally fine. We were becoming a very large, unregulated market.
How big?
How big is the market?
How big is your business today?
Well, the daily fantasy sports sector, I think last year did over $2 billion in entry fees and over about $200 million in revenue.
And how much of that is yours?
We don't really divulge those numbers.
Big chunk of it.
We're the biggest player in the market, but it's a good chunk of it.
So you're saying, so as you grow bigger...
So it's becoming a much bigger market, and what we were, even 2-3 years ago, we started to say, look, we're going to become regulated, right? We're just kind of have to figure out how that happens. And so 2 years ago, we actually made moves to become self-regulated. We got our trade association. I wrote the regulations for our trade association. Everybody signed up to those regs. And that kind of worked for a couple of years, but really what happened then, really from October, was it became apparent that we needed really state-by-state regulation with real consumer protection in it. But it was something we knew was going to happen. We just had no idea how it was going to happen.
Okay, so we get to this spring and summer. You raise a bunch of money. You do more deals. You have a rival, DraftKings. You guys are in a neck-and-neck race. It's a Sirius XM thing. Maybe one of you is going to buy the other. Comes August, the NFL season ramps up. That's your big season, right? You guys are really about pro football. And all of a sudden, not only every football game, but any screen, TV, phone.
Have sports on it.
It doesn't even need sports, right? You could watch no sports, and you would be subjected to your ads.
You're a sports fan.
I'm a sports fan as well.
So we were well targeted. Like, it wasn't like you were...
It was pretty sloppy targeting. It was carpet bombing. So we are drowning, whatever metaphor you want, in your ads and DraftKings ads. Did you realize that the two of you were going to combined to cover America in fantasy ads?
So it was definitely a big ramp up in 2014, and we came through the 2014 season very successfully, and I think the two things that changed for us, well, probably three. First one was just the scale. We massively ramped up the amount we were advertising. Secondly, was just the competitive scale as well, like they ramped up hugely as well. And then thirdly, we moved from very narrow channels, like say ESPN or like sports sites, to broader one. Like once we went to like Sunday Night Football, we were hitting a mass market audience that didn't want to play fantasy sports and didn't be reminded about it every 15 seconds. So yeah, we recognized it was a shift change.
When did you realize that going in and just say, well, you know what, we just got to get over this, we just got to get over this hump, or did you go, oh shit, look what we did?
We knew it was going to be a lot bigger. I think probably by late August, like first week of September, we were like, oh, this is going to be really big. Like we're going to be, one of the top 10 advertisers, and somebody up earlier said that TV advertising doesn't work. It does. It worked very well for us, and so I think the mistake we made. It was very effective in terms of talking to our audience. It was great, and
you found every single person who wants to play daily fantasy sports.
Yeah, but what we probably didn't do, maybe I should use an analogy. As somebody said to me, he said, there's nothing more interesting in life than your fantasy football team, but there's nothing less interesting in life than your buddy's fantasy football team, because you don't care. And so I think what we did is we reminded you about your buddy's fantasy football team every 15 seconds for several months, and that was annoying.
If you were not competing with DraftKings, would you still have spent the same amount of money?
I think it's very hard to do a counterfactual. Yeah. Like I think the competitive dynamic in the market, and there's other players. Like I'd say part of our growth is the competitive dynamics, but also part of our growth has been, we consider ourselves pretty small startups against people like Yahoo and ESPN, and so. I'll be honest, we've lived in fear for when those guys come into the market. Now, Yahoo launched last summer and has a reasonable first year. And so part of it is the competitive dynamic between them, but part of it was also like when they come in, like, Yahoo and ESPN have got 10, I think they've got 10
So you
million.
feel like we're at this race, we got to go as fast as we
We've got to
can.
get out of here before those guys come in and seriously dump on us, which they still can do.
So then do you think then that ad blitz, barrage, I can keep making up metaphors, that led to the regulatory issues you have now? Do you think that prompted people to go, hey, wait a minute, what is this? We should look into this.
Yeah, it definitely put it on.
So you caused your problem?
Possibly, yeah. Like we put it on the radar. And one of the things I would say, though, is that a year ago, we went out and spoke to legislators and said, look, we're becoming a big industry. We have self-regulation. We think it makes sense to clarify the law, because the laws that we're reliant on here are 50, 100 years old. There's no consumer protection, there's no regulation. We think it makes sense to pass, consumer protection regulation. And they're like, nobody cares. Like, who's going to pass a law around fantasy sports? And so we got out, we had planned, we said, look, we're going to have to become regulated. It's going to take 5 years. And our biggest challenge is going to make anybody care, all right? It seems bizarre. And I guess what we did do is we put everybody in the radar. Now people care. It wasn't our intention, but that was one of the impacts.
So now essentially, right, there's some states like New York kicked you guys out. And then other states, you're now proactively going and lobbying for clearance. So you're ending up in this state-by-state fight. So you raised all this money, presumably a lot of it was going to go into advertising. And I assume some of it was going to do something other than have regulatory fights, right? That money was not earmarked to go lobby the state of Kansas.
Well, we're a startup, and things change, and our investors get that. The investment on the regulatory side is very much like an investment in marketing. We're investing in the long-term, surety of the business. Just to give you an idea of what's happening.
One, whether you exist or not, right? I mean, if you don't get the clearance.
Well, so just to give clarity of what actually is happening state by state. So there has been negative opinion. New York, Texas, and Illinois are probably the most notable ones. Similarly, there's been positive. Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Kansas, Maryland. So a lot of states have actually come out and said, no, actually there is existing law, or this is fine within existing law. The bulk of the activity, though, is not at AG, it's at the legislative side. And so we have seen around 16 bills go in, and we expect to see at least another 10 or 15 this session. And those bills are progressing very quickly. So in California here, we passed through the lower house 68-1. In Florida, we've passed through committee. This morning, we passed through the Senate in West Virginia, and in nearly all of these.
None of this is free. You got to pay someone to push you through every one of these legislations.
But that's, the thing that this does is this isn't just about, this clarifies the law for fantasy sports. So it's worth the investment. But this is not about daily fantasy sports. This is fantasy sports in general. That 50 million people who play, the reason why this is passing is because people, legislators say they know it's popular, and they think it's crazy that you can wake up someday and say this game has been around for 50 years and people play for fun is suddenly not legal.
So again, I think a lot about you and Uber and the parallels, the differences. So the Uber, Travis has set this up, as we're going up against Big Taxi and he's an asshole. So that's a quote. That's not me swearing gratuitously. Do you have a version of Big Taxi? Is it legalize gambling interests in other states?
No, that's
who's fighting you?
Yeah. And that's the thing is, we're generally not fighting anyone. Like, this is a product, like, when you talk about disruptive products, there's usually always a loser, right? And Uber knows its taxis, Airbnb knows its hotels. With daily fantasy sports, the fans love it. Like, they, our engagement with the product is through the roof, net promoter score of 60, 70. The sports leagues love it because it drives consumption, and the sports networks love it. So it is a product where really everyone is benefiting. I think the reason that we're getting such traction in the legislators around the country is that there's no real organized opposition. There may be a killjoy or two going, oh, I don't like it, but that's the 60th
and
one. That's
Las
the
Vegas. What about Las Vegas?
So Las Vegas is we used to do a lot of events in Las Vegas as well.
I mean, Las Vegas metaphorically for the legalized gambling business.
Oh, are they opposed?
Yeah, it seems like you're coming in and taking away money from them.
But it's not. Like, our demographic, if you actually ask our players why they play, top 3 reasons are, number 1, this will blow you away, they love the research. It maybe underlies it's kind of a nerdy product, right? They love the competition, and then they love the live scoring experience. It's not remotely like going to a casino. So we've not seen them come out and say, no, we're opposed to this.
Seems pretty logical. They would say, well, we'd like a piece of that.
Like, that's not what we find. Like, I think that's not their public position.
Now, I get an update periodically that says another financial services company is no longer going to work with you guys because they're concerned about regulatory overhang. How much of that can you sustain before you can't operate anymore?
Like, those have been very isolated. Like, it doesn't surprise me. Like, we work with multiple payment processors. We work with multiple issuing banks. Some of those are going to make commercial decisions that, while there's uncertainty, they're going to step back. It's had no impact on our business to date, and I don't think it will.
So you have regulatory issues. On top of that, you have a big perception issue, which is that there's a bunch of stories, stuff like John Oliver, people like Bill Simmons saying that effectively no regular person can really play this game. It's pitched as something that you and I can play, and maybe we can win, or we win $5 or we lose $5. But really, this is a thing that is only it only works if you are a quant with an array of computers and a bunch of money. And it's basically a bunch of professional software folks taking money from groups. So I know that you don't think that's the case. But it doesn't matter whether you think it's the case. You need to convince people that's not the case. So how do you fix that problem?
Yeah, it's good. And we've had that accusation. I think first, fundamentally, is FanDuel's a game of skill. It's like golf. You don't go up against Tiger Woods and think, hey, if I don't beat him.
Right. No, the pitch is you're going up against some jerk off from the bar, right? We're all in the same.
Well, so what we've done and what we've always tried to do is create variety that people can play. Like, you can play. We had during football a Sunday Million League, which is the best players competing for the biggest prizes. If you're a new player who's not familiar with it, that's going to be a very hard league to win. But if you play in a smaller league, like a beginner league or even a friends league, then that's going to be much easier to win. And so we've tried to shift people more to say, this is maybe a league or a 50-50 league. 50-50 league is one where the top half double, the top half win. And there we're saying, you just have to be better than average, right? So surely.
And can you ban the nerds from coming in and stomping?
Yeah, we do. We actually limit their ability to enter into, say, beginner leagues, or we limit their ability to enter into the lower, the $1 or $2 leagues. Just to give you an idea, our average entry fee is $2. So it's actually, again, there's a bit of a mischaracterization. You know, our average deposit is like $20 or $30. Average entry fee is like $2.
And then on top of that, you have this story that comes out that says actually your employees and the DraftKings employees are colluding. It's everyone's worst nightmare of unregulated gambling business, and actually the two sides are working together to shut everybody out.
Yeah.
How'd that go over?
Yeah, that didn't go very well.
Yeah.
So the background to that was, you know, we, if you think 2 years ago, we're a company of about 40 people. This is a very small industry. And so our team, like, you know, people would play on competing sites. Everyone would play test it. And we thought it was good because it's a good idea to what are competitors doing and stuff. And so when that sort of story broke, there was an insinuation that our players, the vast majority who play at very low levels, and somehow were insider traders, as opposed to they just casually played on a competitor site. And so our staff had no access to any special information. So it was a very strange accusation, but it did seem to gain some credibility.
Well, because it was truthy, right?
What do you mean?
I mean, there was, you guys had to say, well, we shouldn't do this. We've got to set up tighter regulations. You ended up coming out saying, we've got to regulate ourselves better. This can't stand.
Yeah, so there's, what we did is that, like, we then banned it. Like, what we saw is the optics of having people play just wasn't worth, like, we did have internal policies about people could play and what they could play. But what we said, like, is, we need a simple policy, and then we banned everybody from playing.
How much of the mess you're in is your fault? How much of it is your competitors at DraftKings' fault? And I want to preface it by saying I originally invited the two of you guys. I invited you and your counterpart to come on, and someone who wasn't you said, that's never going to happen.
That's never going to happen.
You guys can't stand each other.
Well, the funny thing is, like, we actually, on the lobbying side, we do work together because, we share an interest there. I think... I think it's something that happened. I think it's, I'm not going to
goad you into.
Yeah. To bit of trash talk.
Yeah, I tried. And I said at the beginning, this is sort of a Sirius XM thing.
Yeah.
Sirius ended up buying XM. Do you imagine the two of you guys consolidate at some point?
I know they repeatedly kind of mentioned that. It's not something that, like, I know I've got a great business. I know, our unit economics are great. The business is very sustainable.
You've divvied up just from the rights reasons, you've divvied up the different leagues, right? It would make sense for you guys to consolidate just for that.
Well, we still have the same cost, right? So I don't, there's always an economic argument for it, but it's like, I don't see where the need is. And I think it's a great business. There's also other significant players like Yahoo came into the market, and so I think this is a market to support a lot of people.
Assuming you guys survive the next few months, and we go into next
negative.
No, we're going to live in a positive note. If we get to August, start of football season, how are you going to market differently? Yeah, so we're definitely going to market differently. Last year, partly with there's a bunch of media guys who want your money, right? Yeah, that's. So are you going to spend as much, or are you going to spend differently? We're definitely going to spend differently. It probably won't be as much. I think last year was about awareness and education. We've got 83% awareness. People have heard of us. People understand what the product is. I think we're going to do a better job of, like, selling the benefits, why people play, and the aspect of it. And I also think we're going to try and make it a bit more fun. Like, I think through all of this, I think everyone seemed to have lost perspective that this is just a game. It's fun, it's engaging, it's entertaining, and so we're going to probably try and bring that out more in our marketing. Okay, that's the hope. That's fun. That's up. No, fun. Yeah, bit of fun. Questions for Nigel? I'm sure we do.
Hi, I'm Alex. Speaking of fun, what did you think of John Oliver's segment? I guess in two ways. One is, did you think it was funny? And secondly, in terms of accuracy. I did think it was funny. I kind of hid behind the sofa when I watched it.
It was quite painful. Like, I can understand why we were characterized in that way. Yeah, it was pretty painful. Like I guess in some of those aspects we kind of brought that criticism on ourselves.
Can you guys hear Nigel? Did his mic go out?
Mic on.
Is there an on switch here? This is highly technical. Thank you, sir. You got it?
Hello. Yep. So yeah, certainly painful to watch. It was very gratifying to see Seth Rogen in one of our ads like that. I was thinking we could never have paid for that. That was pretty good. And Guilford from Silicon Valley.
Better than Mariah Carey.
So that was a high moment for us. But I still like John Oliver.
Any other questions? Come on, it's your one turn. It's your chance. Here we go.
Hey, is there any kind of mechanism for if someone loses a large amount of money from playing too much, gets addicted, sort of, is there a mechanism that you can identify that and maybe shut them down or offer them help or something?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we do work with the National Council for Problem Gambling. So there is a lot of research into how you would identify somebody with a problem. So that's the expertise that we're tapping for that. Historically, we've not, we have looked into it and we've not seen really instances of problem or significant instances of problem, but we're getting much, much deeper into that to make sure that there isn't. Like our view is that, this is a fun product, an entertainment product. If it's not fun for somebody, then we definitely don't want them on the side.
Have you had to refund anyone's money yet because they've overindulged?
We've definitely shut people's accounts. We definitely, if someone asks you to shut their account, then you shut an account. And as importantly,
I have to raise my hand and say, I've lost too much money with you, please cut me off.
Yeah, and then as importantly, if they come back and say, I feel better, you go, no, that, you're shut down.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Nigel, again, thank you for your candor. Thanks for coming on. I'm very appreciative.
Thank you.